What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from the Altar again, and this time we are here with Mark M.E. Edwards of the almighty Overlord. It is great to be able to have you here. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Oh, thanks, Alex. Thanks for the invitation. Definitely psyched for this.
Yeah, no, it's an honor to be able to have you here, especially because one thing that really makes me happy to do this particular interview is I love Overlord's music. You know, I love a lot of your earlier work, but to have Awaken the Fury out, it's like the first Overlord record I remember like anticipating, you know what I mean? Because I was only 10 years old when the last one came out, so I didn't discover the last one until this new one. So like it's really good to see, you know, another record come to fruition. How has this album cycle been? What was the making of it like, and how has the reception and everything been so far?
Well, the reception has been excellent. Even though it came out very late in 2023 after most websites and all had come up with their best of already for the year, there were a few that actually did add it as their best of or in their top 5 or 10. So that was pretty cool, you know. Yeah. It's very well received. The process was very long and very frustrating, as you know, between the albums, in part because, you know, this isn't our day jobs and families and stuff come first. And, you know, it delayed things. People moved. People came and left the band, you know, but we finally were able to zero in on things, and I was really pushing hard because I knew we had something special, you know.
You most certainly did have something special. That's how I describe this album. Is, you know, I always usually like to have one word to feature each album, whether it's groovy, whether it's hard hitting, or whatever. This to me does have that special element behind it. Did it almost feel like just a continuation, or was the intention to sort of just pick up where you left off after Return of the Snow Giant, or was Awaken the Fury meant to be a new beginning, being that it was almost 20 years?
Well, Return of the Snow Giant was actually all music with some changes that had been written in the 80s when we started in 85. So our initial self-released vinyl EP in 1987 had 5 songs. All right, and that's what got us the reputation after we broke up of being one of the premier U.S. power metal bands. We had no idea. We didn't even know what power metal was.
You know? We're going to get into that later.
Yeah. And so when we reunited, we wanted to, have a better singer than we had at the time, somebody that we always envisioned for us. And we did. We got that with Bobby Lucas, who's now an Attacker, had been in Seven Witches. And get those songs out that we had been performing in the 80s. So we re-recorded 2 of the songs from the EP, the ones that had gotten us that vibe in the 90s from tape trading and stuff like that. And then Bobby wrote new lyrics for some of the songs. But so that was like an 80s, I like to call it like a forgotten Christmas gift that was in the attic and the parents missed it. And like a month later, like, Santa does exist and he left something in the attic. Yeah. So it's like something that was written, even though it wasn't recorded at the time, it was written at the time. When we stayed true to it, just had better recording process, of course.
Yeah.
And so it was like, you know, that forgotten Christmas gift for all the metalheads that loved us from the 80s. Here we were presenting 80s music in a fresh recording that nobody had ever heard before.
Well,
you know, so that was...
That's unique in a way, because this isn't the first time I heard where people like sit on material for like a long time and then it finally does see the light of day. Do you think that the meaning of things like that change in a way? Do you think that the music has like sort of like it ages in a specific way where maybe there's different meaning behind it, maybe you process it a little bit differently, or when you release it you just feel like you're back where you were in the 80s?
Well, in this case, because it's power metal and it's mainly fantasy related, fantasy, history, horror, you know, the human condition, it doesn't change as far as current events. Okay. So, and if anything, the whole fantasy metal thing grew in the 90s. You had Hammerfall come out. That's what really jump-started the metal scene in Europe, you know, late 90s, late 99. Mm-hmm. So that whole, you know, Manowar type of vibe. So to us, we actually had a better reception, I think, by waiting to release it than we may have had if we'd come out with that album in 1988 or 1989, you know. So to us, it was better like that, you know. But this new album, it was all new stuff. We weren't recycling anything. And so we just started from scratch. We decided, whereas about 4 or 5 of the songs I had written fully in Overlord for Return to Snow Giant, we made a conscious decision to make sure everything was co-written by the band. Nothing fully written by me, at least.
Yeah.
So it was a mix. John wrote a couple basically fully. Him and I wrote a few fully with the singer, who is now George Zelikis, and in the band from Zandel. By the way, George Genera is now the drummer. David Bren is no longer the drummer. So George Zelikis would do do the lyrics. He and I wrote some music together because he also plays guitar. And then the drummer had some song concept ideas for lyrics and all. So it was a total different approach. Plus, instead of going into a studio and being in person to record it, we basically, because we all moved apart, did all the recordings at our home studios, and then I mixed it here at my place.
Do you, because when it comes to like the power metal, we're going to get really into this now. First, going with conceptual meanings behind it, because power metal is always fantasy driven, whether it's Manowar or Blind Guardian or a band like Twilight Force nowadays. But there is also the very famous saying, "You are what you create." And, the world, your experiences, whether you realize it or not, are going to influence how you play, what you write, regardless. Has there ever been a time where your personal experiences or your personal life or views or whatever has almost kind of guided your hand with regards to the music as well? Or has Overlord been a means of escapism where you don't want to really kind of look at this material as a self-portrait? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I can't really say that anything is a personal experience because so much of it is about historical battles or horror or fantasy. And the few that are more about the human condition, I don't think any of that has been really personally driven. I will say there's 2 possible exceptions. The song "My Disease" from Return to Snow Giant, even though that music was from the 80s, the lyrics were new from Bobby Lucas, who openly talks about his heroin addiction. And my disease is not a physical disease, it's addiction.
Yeah. All
right. So that really came from his gut, from his personal experience. And that's actually been used in England. They have a Addiction Awareness Week that's sponsored in the UK. And so they've actually shared that song starting last year in September, and they'll be sharing it, every September now, every time they have that week, that awareness week. That's one. And then the other thing, which is not a personal experience, but something that was inspired me subconsciously, was, I loved fantasy books, and I had a few Frazettas hanging up in my room at my parents' house growing up. Or early 80s, once I was in my 20s. And one of them was the Silver Warrior, which is the one where a Conan-style character is being pulled on a sleigh by polar bears.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm at work, I'm at lunch hour, out in a beautiful park, in a beautiful first day of spring. It was probably 1985, I guess. And I'm sitting there, and I've got the music for what became Snow Giant in my head, and I just start writing lyrics. And it's about a warrior king in the frozen north protecting his throne from usurpers. Snow Giant. And that was the Silver Warrior. That's what inspired me subconsciously to write that. But generally it's just what we're interested in. But those are the only 2 that I would say come close to what you were asking about, I think.
Because I feel like with your song titles, in a way, I'm just going to totally randomly name generate it. But when I think of a power metal song title, it's like Ride of the Dragon Warrior into the Demon King, something like that. But I feel like a title track like The Madness Within, that is a very thought-provoking title, or a track like Migraine, or even Paranoid Delusions. Paranoid Delusions could be anything from something that somebody was struggling internally to maybe being like conspiracy-driven. That almost sounds like it could be like a hypocrisy song or something like that. So Like, I think like the titles in itself are very thought provoking, and then you listen to you listen to those riffs and the rhythm and all that, and then you get the full fan. Like, I feel like if your music was instrumental, it would be just as good as conveying the sort of fantasy element with or without lyrics. But the song titles in itself are very thought provoking. Where if I didn't know who you were, I could be like, oh, what is this type of metal? You know.
I appreciate that. And those are the three that I do consider, we do consider the human condition songs. Mm-hmm. Everything else is fantasy or military history on this album. Paranoid Delusions was a concept and title that George the drummer had suggested. So George the singer went with that. George the singer wrote The Madness Within from scratch. He came up with that concept himself. And then Migraine. There's a little bit of a story there. So this might touch on what you were saying as far as personal inspiration. Migraine, I had friends that suffered from bad migraines, debilitating pain. You just lie in bed, you can't do anything. And so I think I had written that down in my song idea file on my cell phone. I have an Excel file that I keep all these ideas when I come up with them. And then one night, I always record my song ideas somehow. If they come to me somehow, I immediately right there, even if I have to hum them, there's no guitar around. So one night I had a headache. I don't get migraines, but I had a headache, and I couldn't get rid of it. And I remembered back in the day, before there were really good aspirins, the only way I could get rid of a headache was to go down and play guitar in my parents' basement. And take my mind off of it, and it would go away. So I went downstairs, do that trick just to play and get my mind off things. And I came up with the main riff for what became Migraine. And I videotaped myself to remember the riff. And I said, I've got a headache tonight. I'm down here trying to get my mind off of it. I came up with this cool riff. We should turn it into a song. I handed that off to George, probably also with the idea about migraine. He took my having a headache and equated it to a migraine, and then just went with it. He investigated all the symptoms that people have, that pain, that excruciating pain, and I think he really conveys that greatly. And I'm looking forward. I got to make sure some of my friends that suffer, that are metalheads, hear that and read those lyrics. I'm looking forward to see what they think. But a few people that have experienced them, they say, yeah, he nailed it right perfectly.
You succeeded, because I don't think any band in history has done this, where saying this song gave me a migraine is almost a compliment, because I really feel like that it is. I feel the pain when I hear that music. So if somebody says, "Oh yeah, that song gave me a headache," they mean it as a compliment.
It conveyed the feeling of having a headache. That's what we can say.
Exactly. Now, on the topic of power metal, and you're not the first I asked this towards. Now, this question is going to be very long, so forgive me. But to me, whether I'm listening to Pantera or Lamb of God, whether I'm listening to a newer band like Bad Omens, for example, or I'm listening to you guys, it all has power in it. To me, power is, as much of an adjective as it is a noun in that regard. So I've always said that power can be demonstrated in not just even metal music. There's R&B music that I think has a lot of power in it too. So in terms of what makes power metal, I hear a lot of newer fans that are referring to Iron Maiden as power metal. But nope, they weren't calling themselves that when they started. People were calling Black Sabbath doom metal, and doom metal didn't exist when they started. Is there something that makes a power metal band a power metal band? Because I think you guys stand out in your own right. Sure, you have a lot of the fantasy elements, but I see a lot of differences between you guys and Manowar. I see plenty of differences between you guys and Blind Guardian or Ice Earth or you name it. So what makes something power metal? Is it within the riffing style and the song structure, or is it really just the lyrical content?
Well, before I get into that, just on the whole thing that you said, you hear power and other things. We were in the issue back in the 80s. We were in the issue of Metal Rendezvous magazine that had Gary Moore on the cover. And the secondary, one of the secondary headline articles was power metal, and it listed all thrash bands. All right, Anthrax and stuff, Overkill. I was like, so back then they didn't even know really what power metal was. you know. And like I said, by the time we didn't really know until we reunited in 2000, what's this term, you know?
Yeah.
So to me, what I think power metal in general, there's basically two styles. There's Euro power metal, that's a little more happy and often has keyboards. You know, everybody's victorious all the time, you know?
Like Freedom Call.
Yeah. And Stradivarius and those types of bands. Then you've got US power metal. So like us, Jagdpanzer, where we don't use keyboards, but we sing the similar topics with the fantasy and stuff, you know, but we're heavier. We don't use keyboards. I like to say that we're the closest thing to traditional or classic metal of all the subgenres. And the only thing that makes us power metal is because of the song subject matters.
Yeah, because like let's say for instance, Phil Anselmo was singing about dragons and, you know, like fantasy elements. Would that all of a sudden turn Pantera into a power metal band? Or like if you sound like, you know, Cannibal Corpse, but you're singing about those subject matters, is that, you know?
I think you have to have higher range vocals also. Mm-hmm. All right, you can't have death metal vocals and be a power metal band because then you're death metal. Really,
Terry Glaze era Pantera might work.
Yeah. And so I think you have to have a more melodic, higher vocalist.
Yeah.
As far as the guitar style, I mean, a lot of them can be dual guitar solos, harmony, shredding, stuff like that. But, you know, that's not what we are. And even Jagdpanzer doesn't necessarily fit that bill either. You know, there's not a ton of classic shredding / dual guitar. They're a little more straightforward, even though there are two guitarists in that band. So I think the key thing is more of a melodic, high-range vocalist and the subject matter. A lot of times it can be that double guitar attack. And, you know, a little heavier, faster than an Iron Maiden. Now, here's something that might blow your mind. All right. Why am I having a brain fart? The album before Firepower from Priest. Not Angel Retribution is.
Yeah, I'm having a brain fart too. So
yeah. Why am I doing that? Anyway, that to me is a U.S. power metal album.
Well, and Painkiller was as much of like a thrash album in that
right.
regard. So
yeah, but the songs are mainly about fantasy stuff. You know, sort of Damocles, things like that.
Redeemer of Souls.
They're not using, Redeemer of Souls. There you go. And so the music, no keyboards. It's Priest, but it's still straight ahead. And the vocals, the lyrics, they're Valhalla. You know, there's so much stuff there that would be perfect in any power metal band. So to me, even though there's only one American in Judas Priest, Scott Travis, that truly is a U.S. power metal album.
That's a great way of putting it because there is also such a thing as sprinkles of power metal. Like, you know, you don't have to be like Sonata Arctica to, you know, have some power in your music. Like I've seen bands like Avenged Sevenfold incorporate those elements, but I wouldn't call them a power metal band any day of the week. So
yeah.
So before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for such an awesome conversation. And most of all, just thank you for bringing us new music. Is there just anything else with Overlord we could be expecting in the future? Because I would definitely love to hear more.
Well, the EP that I mentioned from 1987, our record label No Remorse is reissuing that later this year.
Hell yeah.
CD, so it'll be the first time on CD and vinyl. And there's going to be 3 unreleased live songs, all right? Songs that nobody's ever heard before unless they were in the audience back in the 80s.
Ooh.
So it's a board mix off of one of our shows. Even though it was a cassette, there's technology now where I was able to mix it a little bit. So it's going to be an expanded. It'll be, instead of 5 songs, it'll be an 8-song EP. And that's coming out before the end of the year. So even though it's old material, there's at least 3 songs that nobody's ever heard before.
Hell yeah. It'll feel good to hear that live stuff and be -7 again. I cannot wait to hear it.
There you go. And it's mastered the way we should have had it mastered back then.
that could change the whole thing. There's a lot of albums that are just absolute classics in my eyes, but if they were just produced a little bit better or mastered a little bit better, I think a whole more of a younger generation could appreciate it. So that's great to hear. But thank you so much, everybody. Mark Emmy Edwards of the almighty Overlord, Awaken the Fury. Check that out. New stuff coming very soon. We'll see you next time on Heavy New York.
All right. Overlord.com. Thanks, everybody, and thank you to your audience. Take care.